Beliefs are the most powerful human invention ever created. They are responsible for the collapse of civilizations, for taking us to the moon, and for shaping our personal reality. This video is about the power of beliefs and how one in particular was responsible for killing thousands. This is the story of Ignaz Semmelweis and hand washing. It was 1846 and more than 100 years had passed since the Enlightenment movement started taking over the intellectual space. Fantastic and religious beliefs were being displaced by reason as the primary way of knowing, and the scientific method started to gain popularity. This new mindset was becoming more and more predominant in different fields like physics, math, astronomy, and of course, medicine. And doctors like Ignaz Semmelweis were no longer thinking of illnesses as an imbalance caused by bad air or evil spirits. Instead, they were looking at anatomy. Autopsies became more and more common, and doctors paid increasingly more attention to data rather than superstitious beliefs as a means to reach conclusions. When Dr. Semmelweis took on a new job in the maternity clinic at the General Hospital in Vienna, he noticed that something strange was happening. The number of women in maternity wards dying from childbed fever was higher than usual. So, like a good Enlightenment doctor, he set up to find the reason behind it. By analyzing the numbers, he realized that women in the ward staffed by male doctors and medical students were dying from childbed fever at a rate almost 5 times higher than the women residing at a different ward, staffed by female midwives exclusively. But why? To discover it, Semmelweis went through the differences between the two wards and started ruling out ideas. Right away, he discovered a big differences between the two clinics. In the midwife's clinic, women gave birth on their sides, while on the men's clinic, women gave birth on their backs. To see if this was causing the spike in death rates, he had women in the doctor's clinic give birth on their sides, but the change had no effect. Then he noticed that whenever someone on the men's ward died of childbed fever, a priest would walk slowly through the doctor's clinic past the women's bed with an attendant ringing a bell. This time, he suspected that the priest and the bell ringing terrified the already debilitated women so much that they developed a fever, got sick, and died. In consequence, Semmelweis had the priest change his route and ditch the bell. But again, no change was perceived. Tired of constant trial and error, he decided to take some vacations and go to Venice, with the intent of clearing his head and relax, at least a little bit. When he came back, he got the news that a good friend of his, a pathologist, had died from an illness he caught after doing an autopsy. Curious, Semmelweis investigated his friend's symptoms and realized he died from the same thing as the women he had autopsied. Something clicked in his mind. Childbed fever wasn't something only women in childbirth suffered. It was something that other people in the hospital could get sick from as well. This was an advancement, but still, it didn't explain the reason behind the differences in death rates between the two wards. He was close, but not there yet. With this newly discovered piece of information, he kept the problem in his mind for days and weeks until a flash of insight hit him. The big difference between the men's ward and the midwife's ward was that the doctors performed autopsies on a daily basis while the midwives weren't. The final piece of the puzzle finally fell in its place. Semmelweis hypothesizes that there were cadaverous particles that doctors were getting on their hands when they dissected the dead bodies. And when they went upstairs and delivered the babies, these little pieces of corpse would get inside the women who developed the disease and finally die. To contextualize the genius of his insight, science in 1846 was clueless about the existence of particles, bacteria, viruses, and how illnesses truly worked and spread from one organism to the other. So, if his conclusions were correct, the only way to decrease the number of women dying was to eliminate the dangerous particles from the doctor's hands. He ordered his medical staff to start cleaning their hands and instruments, and not just with soap but with a chlorine solution right away, which by the way is one of the best disinfectants there is. Nowadays, hand washing is an essential practice in hospitals and homes that is proven to prevent the spread of diseases and reduce the chances of infections. But this was not even suspected in the 1800s, so when the theory was taken into practice, the rate of mothers dying fell dramatically. Logically, everyone was so happy with Semmelweis' discovery. He finally solved the riddle, and who knows how many lives he will save from then on, right? Well, not really. Doctors were upset because Semmelweis' hypothesis made it look like they were the ones giving childbirth fever to the women. Also, the existence of tiny living beings that were responsible for carrying the disease went against the established medical paradigm and the belief structure of the day. Not everyone was on board of the Enlightenment train just yet. In time, doctors gave up hand washing and Semmelweis lost his job. Despite his initial failure, he kept trying to convince other hospitals to implement hand washing, but unfortunately, to no avail. No one was listening. The medical community was still clinging to their unfounded beliefs, and thousands of mothers kept on dying. Time went by, and the infamous doctor got angrier and eventually estranged. Finally, in 1865, when he was just 47 years old, he was committed to a mental asylum where he was probably beaten up regularly. After a few months of staying there, he died of sepsis, an infection in the bloodstream. Ironically, a very similar disease that this courageous doctor fought so hard to prevent in his previous years. Even though this story didn't have a happy ending, it is a clear example of the power of beliefs and its limiting nature. In this case, the belief that particles which Semmelweis hypothesized weren't real and that diseases were caused by evil spirits and curses. Just a single one can have huge repercussions in our personal lives and society as a whole. So my question for you as well as for me is, how many beliefs do we have that might not be true at all? Even though people in the past were sure that the earth was flat, we now know better. But nothing prevents us from falling into a similar trap. Are we 100% sure that the beliefs that we have are based on reason and evidence, or are they just wishful thinking? Are we, right in this moment, holding beliefs that keep us stuck personally, professionally, and as a society? Do we believe that talent and success, for example, are traits that we are born with, or do we hold them as something that can be worked on and created? Or are you confident that the way that you do your work is the best way possible, or you just learn it that way and never questioned it? If you begin asking this type of questions, you'll perhaps realize that most of what you held as true was nothing more than a belief that was limiting you in some way or another. By adhering to the principle of honesty, reason, evidence, and discovery, and practicing them daily, we can transform our lives, work, and world. Just as the Semmelweis story taught us, what appears to be true doesn't necessarily need to be, and that most beliefs hold us back, separating us from genuine change and ultimately the truth. Adopting a mindset of discovery and questioning will make life much more interesting, open up the doors of freedom from imposed assumptions, and true personal transformation possible. So, be brave, go against your minds and society's status quo, and question everything. This is Juan Cruz from Inerize. You are also invited to subscribe, give it a thumbs up, and share it with a friend who might find this interesting. See you soon.